Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to ThinkView, and this is NK. Sitting with me today is the TUF Gaming A14, a laptop that I was mistakenly thinking it was an ultrabook because it was so thin. But don't judge the book by its cover, because the performance inside the thing is seriously impressive. It can handle basically everything that you throw at it, from gaming to editing to even running AI locally on this same machine. And the reason why this laptop can bring such powerful performance comes down to the chip inside. It's currently powered by the Ryzen AI Max Plus 392. What a mouthful name to say. Anyways, this chip has two major advantages. First, it was so power efficient. And second, both the CPU and GPU are integrated into the same SoC, which means that they can share together the 64GB of onboard memories. It's basically very similar to Apple Unified Memory concept. And in today's videos, let's break it down. What is its weakness, what it can do best, and who is this for? Now, let's get started. Now, before we talk about performance, let's quickly go over the TUF Gaming A14 so you can understand that how thin this thing is. This is only a 14-inch laptop. It weighs just about 1.48 kilograms and is only 16.9 millimeter of thickness. Honestly, when you hold it in your hand, you feel it's no different from your regular ultrabook. And it can also open flat up to 180 degrees like this. The display itself is a 2.5K IPS panel with a 16:10 aspect ratio, alongside with a 165Hz refresh rate and a 3 millisecond response time. So gaming, especially the esports title, feel extremely smooth. It's also reached up to 400 nits of brightness and fully cover 100% of sRGB color gamut. Overall, this is a display that works really well for both gaming and content creation. But the most valuable part of this laptop comes from the chip inside. The Ryzen AI Max Plus 392 is basically the cut-down version of the last year Ryzen AI Max Plus 395. On this version, AMD reduced the CPU core count, but the GPU remained the same. So you will get 12 CPU core instead of 16. Which also makes the Strix Halo platform more accessible in terms of pricing. But still, with the current situation of the memory market, even cutting down some core won't bring the price down anymore. The most interesting thing about Strix Halo is that it's designed around the concept of unified memory. So basically, it's CPU and GPU that's sharing the same pool of high bandwidth memory. And because this TUF Gaming A14 also comes with 64GB of memory, both CPU and GPU can practically access almost the entire memory capacity. And this becoming extremely important for workload like on-device AI or something like virtual machine. For example, on a traditional RTX 5060 laptop, you usually only get around 8GB of VRAM. That's perfectly fine for gaming, for video editing, or basic rendering. But once you start working with local AI, especially larger models, 8GB of VRAM quickly becoming a bottleneck. Meanwhile, on platforms like Strix Halo, you can dedicate up to 48GB of memory directly to the GPU, which means a workflow that previously required a workstation or a very expensive RTX card can now be run on a thinner line laptop. But the story here isn't just about more memory. The Strix Halo platform can give you a lot of flexibility. For example, the Ryzen AI Max Plus 392 inside the TUF Gaming A14 consumes around 115 watts at peak and usually sustain at around 90 watts. But unlike regular gaming laptops that provide power separately between CPU and GPU, this platform can dynamically provide resources depending on the workload. For example, when compiling code, the CPU gets prioritized. Or like during gaming, more power shifts toward the GPU. And for AI workflow, the memory bandwidth becomes the most important factor. So overall, this is the platform that adapts very dynamically depending on the task that you are doing. Now, in terms of CPU performance, the Ryzen AI Max Plus 392 is seriously a powerhouse. In Cinebench 2024, it performs significantly faster than the standard Apple M5 and only falls behind the M5 Pro. For such a thin and lightweight laptop, this is genuinely top-tier CPU performance. Workloads like video editing or multitasking or coding or virtual machine or becoming a mobile workstation isn't a problem with this machine at all. But what impressed me even more is how efficient it is. Compared to the Ryzen AI 9 HX370, the power scaling behavior is actually very similar. And since both of them are using the same Zen 5 architecture for the chip, I strongly believe that this will bring a very solid battery life. The most surprising part is the integrated graphic card, the Radeon 8060S GPU. If we look at a synthetic benchmark like Wildlife Extreme or TimeSpy graphic, the performance is actually very close to the RTX 5060 running at 115 watts, and also surprisingly close to the Apple M5 Pro. Of course, synthetic benchmark only tell a part of the story. What matters most is how it's performed under daily usage. For example, like in gaming, Cyberpunk 2077 and Black Myth Wukong running at high setting and 2.5K resolution, the TUF Gaming A14 still fall behind the regular RTX 5060 gaming laptop, even though the CPU and GPU benchmark individually look very competitive. And the reason is quite interesting. In gaming, both CPU and GPU has to work at the same time. Once that happens, the system has to start dynamically sharing power and resources between both components. Meanwhile, an RTX 5060 has its own dedicated VRAM and dedicated power budget. But the Radeon 8060S inside the Strix Halo share everything with its CPU. So under sustained heavy gaming workload, the FPS on the TUF Gaming A14 is actually falls behind. However, if we look at the overall power consumption, the TUF Gaming A14 is significantly lower. The entire SoC only uses around 100 watts, which is actually lower than the power consumption of the dedicated GPU. And because of that, long gaming sessions also feel noticeably cooler and more power efficient, which means that this chip is perfectly suited for high-performance but thinner light laptop. Now, if you compare it to the Apple M5 Pro in graphic work, well, the TUF Gaming A14 is still fall behind too. When doing Blender render or Adobe Premiere, it took longer time to export videos. Part of the reason comes from the Apple extremely optimized ecosystem around macOS and Metal. But one of the more important reasons is that because macOS has a much better way to manage the unified memory, and Windows, well, it's not that good. I will talk more about that later. But that doesn't mean that Strix Halo is no good for video editing. In 4K editing workflow, it still feels extremely smooth because unlike synthetic benchmark or long rendering, editing workflow don't constantly hammer both CPU and GPU at the same time. Now, the area where the Ryzen AI Max 392 really stand out, in my opinion, is the on-device AI. 64GB of unified memory is almost unmatched at this price point. On NVIDIA laptop, VRAM is usually limited to just around 8GB. Meanwhile, upgrading Apple devices to larger memory capacity becoming extremely expensive. I also ran a few AI tests myself. For smaller models like just a few billion parameters, which comfortably fit inside 8GB of VRAM on the RTX 5060, NVIDIA still clearly has an advantage. In those situations, RTX GPU remains the fattest option. But once we move into larger models like those with more than 20 billion parameters, which usually would take around 10 or more GB of RAM, then the RTX laptop will start overflowing into its system RAM, and the token generation speed drops dramatically. At that point, laptops like the M5 Pro with 24GB of memory can still run this model reasonably well. However, once I move into even larger mixture of expert model, which is around 30 billion parameter, this is where the MacBook cannot hold itself anymore, and the advantage starts shifting very clearly toward the Strix Halo. And that's because the mixture of expert models usually require a huge amount of memory to fully load the whole models. But when it comes to calculating, it only activating a small subset of parameters during inference. And that kind of workflow is perfect for a platform which has a large amount of high bandwidth memory along with a strong GPU hardware, exactly like this TUF Gaming A14 with the Ryzen AI Max Plus 392. However, during the testing, I discovered something really interesting. While AMD trying to use the unified memory concept from Apple, the Windows is the part that holding it back. You see, when VRAM is set to auto, the AI processing performance is actually becoming noticeably slower compared to manually allocating dedicated VRAM to the GPU. The reason is that dynamically shared memory introduces overhead because Windows is constantly checked for which memory part is for the CPU and which is for the GPU. So if you are planning to buy a Strix Halo laptop specifically for AI workflow, I highly recommend to set a dedicated amount of VRAM for the GPU. So what is my conclusion? Well, after spending quite some time with the TUF Gaming A14, my conclusion is that this laptop is not for everyone, and actually, it's just for a little group of people, those who work on AI but also do a little mix of editing video and gaming. Then in that case, Strix Halo becoming extremely interesting platform. But if your workflow depending on the media creation, then I think the MacBook is still one of the best choice right there. Or even if you're just doing gaming, then even the TUF Gaming A14 from last year is still the better choice. But what's your thought with the TUF Gaming A14 this year, especially with the Strix Halo version? Let me know in the comment section down below, okay? And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any upcoming videos about the latest tech. Now, thanks for watching. This is NK from ThinkView, and see you guys next time.